Okay, for this assignment, you're going to take your 10 photos and edit them in a very simple way in Gimp. So first things first is I'll open up a picture here. And I want to show you guys, if you go up to Tools, or actually Colors, you can also access by going to Tools and then Color Tools, but to skip a step, just go to Colors. And you're going to see that there's Color Balance, Hue, Saturation, Colorize, Brightness, Contrast, Threshold, Curves, Levels, Posterize, Desaturate, Invert. And I'm going to kind of let you guys have free reign just to kind of play around with all these things. In this video, I'll just kind of give you a few tips and tricks. So this hue and saturation, hue is just another word for color. Saturation is how intense the color is. So if I ignore all this stuff up here and I just look right here at hue, hue means the type of color. So if I drag my hue, what it's going to do is change the overall color of this image. Now if I left it like this, you know, it kind of has this eerie look to it, but at the same time, people that are familiar with Photoshop and Gimp would look at this image and think, oh, someone just edited it. So it's fun to play around with, but keep in mind, kind of as you edit it, that you can over-edit it to the point of it looking like garbage. And then of course there's lightness. Lightness just means how light it is, or how dark you make it. Again, if you kind of stretch it too far, especially if your image isn't really high quality, you're going to notice this graininess around here, and it's going to look kind of garbagey. So again, if you adjust lightness and darkness, maybe you only do it a scotch to make a slight difference. And then the fun part here is saturation. So if I lower my saturation, that means it lowers the color. So now it's a black and white image. So if I wanted it to be black and white, that'd be perfect. I could go to saturation and desaturate it. Or I could make it just less saturated. If I want it to look more antique-y, kind of wash out the colors, I could play around with busting up the saturation, which again, if I go all the way to 100%, it almost makes it look cartoonish. If I bump it up a little bit, maybe sometimes I can help it just kind of look a little more extra colored. So that's hue and saturation. If I go up to colors again and look down at brightness and contrast is the other one I wanted to show you in this video. You can see there's brightness, which is kind of like lightness, makes it light or dark. And then contrast, which basically, contrast means how much of a difference is there between white and black in your picture. So if you up the contrast, it's going to make the contrast really high. There's a huge difference between white and black. And if I lower the contrast, it's going to make it a little bit more grayed out and similar. So something fun that you could do is you could even do colors, desaturate. There's a shortcut to do that, to just desaturate it. That means it makes it black and white. And then once it's black and white, I can go to brightness, contrast, and then play around with contrast. So I could take my black and white image and then kind of bump it up so that the blacks get a little darker, the whites get a little lighter, and then it ends up having this nice sort of contrast. So let me open up my history palette, and I'll undo. Back to the base image, all right. So that's hue and saturation, and then brightness and contrast. And then I want to show you levels. Levels is another way of playing around with the lightness and darkness, and it's a little bit more specific, and honestly, most of the time, if you were a graphic designer or a Photoshop user, you'll probably use curves or levels. This is levels. You'll see that kind of shows you how much lightness is in the image, how much darkness is in the image, and you can click and drag sort of the fulcrum. You can click and drag the edges of levels to change kind of how dramatically everything changes. It's just another way to alter it. You might enjoy that one better than the others. It's up to you. If I go to colors again, so I just played with levels. Curves is directly under it, and curves is very similar to levels. It's just another way of looking at it, another way of tweaking the image. And some people like curves better. So you can see how that kind of affects the image. Go back to my colors toolbar. Posterize, basically this is reducing it to a bunch of almost like layers, little chunks of color. This is a fun one if you're trying to make a stencil. Then you can maybe take a black and white image and change it so it's only black and white, no gray value at all. That can be kind of fun. Generally though, you don't want to use it for just artistic aspects. You can make it work. Maybe for like a concert poster or something. It might be kind of fun because you might have to use simplified colors. But overall, we probably won't be using that one as much. If I look at invert, invert can be kind of fun or it can just look really cheesy. But if I do invert, what it basically does is flips everything backwards. So whatever the opposite is on the color wheel. If it were black and white, it would make whatever's white black, whatever's black white. So it just kind of turns the image inside out, so to speak. An invert can be fun to play around with again too, or it can just look silly if you overuse it. Alright, so that is kind of the basics here. I skipped over color balance, I skipped over colorize, I skipped over threshold. You can play around with those. They're just different, again, just kind of different ways to play around with your image. Colorize is sort of fun that if you have like a portrait and you want to just have the portrait be represented in only one color, it's kind of fun. Let's see. Threshold, I'm less familiar with threshold. But you can see it makes it solid black and white. Again, another way you could do like a stencil if you wanted to, or a stamp. And yeah, so I think that's about it. Oh, color balance, you can select cyan, magenta, yellow. Cyan means blue. So like if you look up at the blue in the sky, you're going to see that it's going to change that quite considerably. The magentas, this would change the magenta parts of the photograph. The yellows. So here I told you I wasn't going to show you all that stuff and I changed my mind, I did. So now you've seen all of these like color tools. So for those 10 photos, just play around with these. Have fun with them. Remember that you have your history palette, so if you ever do something really ridiculous and you're like, ooh, that looks ugly, but I was just playing around, you can just back it up and redo something. Sometimes, like I was saying, you might only do a slight change. Maybe for it to look good, you only bust up the light a little bit or lower it a little bit. It doesn't need to be drastic. But play around with those, experiment with them, and try and take these photos that you have and twist them a little bit to where they're maybe just a little bit better, a little bit more interesting. All right, thanks.